Welcome on in, everybody. Today, I'll be reviewing Winnie-the-Pooh Blood and Honey 2, the sequel to Winnie-the-Pooh Blood and Honey, a movie, let's just say, didn't get a lot of love in 2023. Also, just a little heads up, stay tuned till the end of the video. I'll give you kind of a brief rundown of a little trailer teaser that we got to see for the new Bambi the Reckoning movie that'll be coming out as well. There's also a post-credit scene in this movie we'll talk about also. But anyways, now I'm going to run down just a little bit of a brief synopsis of the overall plot of the movie. Not wanting to live in the shadows any longer, Winnie-the-Pooh, Piglet, Owl, and Tigger take their fight to the town of Ashdown, leaving a bloody trail of death and mayhem in their wake. Now let's get into some things I think the movie did well. So the movie in the intro wastes no time at all. Besides the whole recap of what Christopher and Pooh have been up to, they just throw you right into it and you get a ton of blood, guts, and gore right off the bat. You've got these girls who are just getting brutally killed. One of them gets her legs and arms broken, gets her head in a bear trap. There's a lot of explosions, just a lot of things going on right away. You also get a little sneak peek on what the characters look like, what to expect going forward in the story. So the intro right away, you're like, okay, I'm buckled up and ready for this. Another positive that I want to mention is this movie does such a better job character building than the first movie. And I know that's such a low bar, but still, just in general, I think the movie does a pretty solid job building the characters' backstories, the characters that you're following in the story, but also not doing that too much and mixing in some carnage and some action at the same time, not to make you get too bored. Specifically, I want to talk for a second about Christopher Robin's dad. I think they did a good job just with his story. I know that's kind of a small aspect of the movie just in general, but typically in a movie like this, I would expect them to cast somebody who's going to play somebody who's just kind of a dad, who's kind of a dickhead to their son, because their son has so much drama going on in the town, just a lot of different aspects to the son's story, which is clearly causing some stress on them. But no, instead they decided to have that character be like this empathetic dad who's caring, who tries to like go to bat for his son. And I like that aspect of it. But like I said, just in general, the character building and the backstories and just trying to put more effort into making you care about the characters and what they're up to, I think in this movie, especially when compared to the first movie, is much better, and just in general was actually pretty solid. And yeah, I've already kind of talked about the carnage a little bit, so we might as well mention that as the next positive for me. There are a lot of kills in this movie. I would actually love to go back and count the body count in this movie because it is a super high number, especially towards the second half of the movie. There's a sequence there where there's people just dropping left and right. At one point, you're just kind of like, I don't even know how many people are dying here, but there are so many people dying all over the place. And you would think with such a high body count in a movie like this, that the quality would probably go down a little bit. But no, you can clearly see they put a lot of time and a lot of effort into coming up with unique ways to kill off people and just cool and fun and interesting ways to pull off the kills in this movie just in general. This isn't a movie where there's maybe a handful of kills and they're more drawn out, like torture, mutilation type stuff. No, not at all. But like I said, they're very fun to watch, unique and interesting, and pulled off pretty well. Yes, there's some CGI, but there's also some practical effects as well. Some of the CGI is a little bit iffy here and there with the kills, but overall the kills are very, very good. I mean, there's a sequence where a guy gets like a shotgun shoved through the bottom of his head. There's this one that was kind of funny. It's like a bear trap on like a chain. He throws it at this girl and it latches onto her head and he just pulls it off. But that's not it. When the head is pulled off and kind of flying back, he just winds up with the bat or a stick or whatever it is and just hits it and the head explodes. But that's just an example. There are so many crazy, unique kills in this movie. One of the bloodiest movies I have seen in a while, for sure. So if you're into the carnage, if you're into blood, guts, and gore like I am in my horror movies and slasher movies, then you are going to get plenty of that in this movie. And another positive I want to mention is with the 100-acre wood. I think in this movie, especially when compared to the first movie, has a much better vibe to it. It definitely seems like a more believable place, not just some silly-looking, low-budget set, kind of like what they had in the first movie. This looks kind of creepy and eerie and kind of overgrown. It just looks much better in this movie, and they pulled that off really well. Obviously, a pivotal and important part of the story. So I was glad to say that they did a good job kind of pulling that off. I also thought to myself while watching this movie, we get a much more believable backstory on Pooh, on why he's so messed up and why he's so vicious. In the first movie, it was kind of just like, well, Christopher left them, so they're kind of pissed off about that. But in this movie, they dive into that a little bit deeper and give you more of a backstory on exactly why Pooh came to be how he is. And it's a much more believable story to me. And it just makes more sense. And as an audience, I feel like you're standing there or you're sitting there and you're just kind of like, okay, I can understand that. That's actually kind of interesting and that's well thought out, which I thought was a pretty solid aspect of the movie. And just to kind of piggyback off of that and dive into that a little bit more. So I just mentioned the movie does a pretty good job explaining the motivation on why Pooh and the others are so vicious. But the movie also does a pretty good job explaining who they are. In the first movie, it's just kind of like a chubby dude walking around in a fake-looking Winnie-the-Pooh mask, just doing crazy shit. And in this movie, they actually do explain what these things are, where they came from, how they came to be. Not only, like I said, just the motivation, but how these creatures are here on the earth with us. And I think the movie actually was pretty effective in explaining that. It was pretty entertaining as well and kind of interesting too. And, it's nothing groundbreaking or super unique, but they actually did put some effort into explaining who these things are. And the last positive that I want to mention is, to me, I personally actually like these children's stories being turned into horror movies. I don't have a problem with it as long as the production is genuinely passionate about horror movies and that comes across on screen and it's not just a cash grab. I know a lot of people with the original movie kind of felt like that a little bit. And so they were feeling like it wasn't, a genuine product. It was just something being pumped out using the name just to get a little bit of cash and say bye-bye. But this movie, you can clearly see more so that there was more passion put into the project and just more of a passion for the horror genre, which I really loved. But just in general, this idea of taking these children's stories and turning them into horror movies, I think is a pretty damn cool idea. I'm a fan of it as long as the passion is there and it's a genuine product that, they have like the right motivations behind. So, and with this movie, I enjoyed that aspect, taking the Winnie the Pooh story and turning it into a horror movie. All right, next I want to talk about some of the things in the movie that are mixed for me. So there's this little secondary underlying story in this movie about our main character who had a brother many, many years ago that disappeared. And to me, this is something I'm a little mixed on. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't necessarily love it. But it's a storyline that felt oddly just too much, way too similar to the most recent Five Nights at Freddy's movie, especially when you factor in this movie, he's trying to figure out the crime through like hypnosis. In the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, he's trying to figure out the crime through his dreams, very, very similar. They're both also kind of like bouncing ideas and kind of just venting about it and talking about it with a girl they kind of like. Just too many probably similarities for my taste with a movie that was released so recently. It's in the horror genre, has kind of a similar audience in a lot of ways. Probably too many similarities for me. Don't necessarily hate it, don't necessarily love it. So it's just kind of mixed for me on that category. Another thing that I want to mention that's kind of mixed for me, it's not necessarily something that I hate, it's not necessarily something that I love, just kind of something I probably need to think about a little bit more, maybe going back and rewatch this movie again. But they used the first movie as kind of a prop in the second movie. And I don't want to dive into it too much and spoil too much with that. But they used the first movie, like I said, as kind of a prop in this movie to kind of push that movie to the side a little bit and say, that was kind of its own thing. Now we're going in this direction in a way. Don't worry about that. Just focus on this movie. And I thought that was pulled off kind of in an interesting way. They clearly put some thought into that, whether they wanted to connect themselves too much or very little to the first movie. I thought that was interesting in a way. But like I said, just kind of mixed on that, using the first movie as a prop in this movie in a sense. Don't necessarily love it, don't necessarily hate it, something I'm just kind of thinking about a little bit more. So I wanted to mention that as a, kind of the mixed category for me. All right, and the last thing that I want to mention in the mixed category for me is I'm still a little on the fence about setting a slasher movie in England. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about. So the directing talent, the acting talent, just the production talent on making movies and TV shows in England, the writing talent is incredible in England. I personally watch a ton of English shows and movies, love it. But for a slasher movie, the fact that you guys don't really have guns out there for a slasher makes it a little bit weird at times, just because the villain kind of can do whatever they want. Even when the cops show up, the cops are like, I'm just going to blind you to death with my flashlight. And it's kind of like, well, dude, this guy is ripping people apart, killing people left and right. Can we get a machine gun up in here, something to solve this crime? Because what you're doing is not working. Yes, there are some guns in this movie, a little bit of guns in this movie, but overall, it kind of takes away a little bit of that vulnerability to me with the villain in the story, because there's so little weapons or so little guns in the country that the movie's set in. We're not talking about gun control or any weird shit like that here. No, we're just talking about the movie for specifically setting a slasher movie in England. Because like I said, the villain can kind of just go around and do whatever they want because nobody can defend themselves. Like I said, I'm not really sure if I love that or hate that. I'm just a little mixed on it, but something I want to mention. All right, next, let's get into some of the negatives for Winnie-the-Pooh Blood and Honey 2 for me. So one thing I just want to mention for a second is like, Christopher Robin's like 35 years old now, but he still lives with his parents and they still call him, hey kid, and hey little buddy, and all that kind of stuff. That was a little bit weird, but anyways. Also, there's a key moment in the movie where Christopher Robin confronts somebody very, very important in the storyline, and that person just kind of gives him everything. Doesn't put up any sort of a fight, just kind of confesses for everything. That came off a little bit weird to me. I didn't really necessarily love that happened so quickly. And I know it could have been just because that person had been weighing on him for so long, and they were going to do something shortly after this scene. That could be why. But still, I thought it was a little bit too quick for my taste and just seemed a little bit too easy for such a pivotal point in the story, but just something I want to mention as a negative. Another negative that I want to mention has to do with one of the kills specifically. Now, this is kind of a little bit of a nitpick, but there's a moment where they show a dishwasher and something with the dishwasher. And as soon as they show that, you're like, oh, okay. I know what's going to happen with that. And lo and behold, later on in the movie, the exact thing I predicted happens with that dishwasher. So it's just kind of a little bit of a nitpick, but one of those things where you're like, come on, guys, don't make it that obvious, even though it's still kind of enjoyable. Don't make it that obvious. So a little bit of a nitpick and a little bit of a negative for me. All right, and the next negative that I want to mention is, I don't know if it was just me or my movie theater, but the audio to me seemed a little bit off at times. So there were times where people were speaking and the music was a bit too loud. You could barely hear what they were saying. And it wasn't a party or anything like that. It was just like a dialogue scene between two people and nobody else. That was a little bit off. There was also a scene where one of the characters is slashing somebody, and there were no sound effects when they used sound effects throughout all the other scenes with that character. That was weird. It was like, oh, what just happened there? That seemed like, it genuinely seemed like they missed it or something. I'm sure it was intentional with a movie like this, but it almost came across of like they missed putting the sound effect in that specific scene. But overall, I think the score in this movie is good. I didn't mention that as a positive, but there were some things with the sound mixing where the levels were a little too high or a little bit low for my taste, but just something I want to mention as a negative for me. Now, since so many people hated the first movie and felt like it was so shallow and so just ridiculous in so many different ways, with the second movie, they wanted to just give you more depth to the story, clearly. But for me, where they want you to have some emotion, they want you to kind of feel something in the story, it doesn't really land for me. I mean, a lot of that has to do with probably just the premise of the story. It's Winnie the Pooh and his buddies killing people and, playing with honey occasionally, right? It's how can you be emotional in a story like that? There are some moments where you kind of feel a little something, but I thought overall, where they try to make you feel something emotionally, didn't really land for me. Also, another negative that I want to mention is this movie does take itself a little too serious for my taste. Like I said, in the end, this is Owl, Winnie the Pooh, and buddies on a revenge tour, killing people in brutally ridiculous, funny, silly ways. This movie takes itself a little too serious at times. I kind of do wish it would lean a little bit more into the campiness. We do get some one-liners from some of the villains later on in the story, which were kind of funny here and there. But I wish they would lean into that a little bit more. Continue having a higher production value, better kills, more kills, still building a story, but also incorporate more one-liners and more funny moments that'll make the audience laugh. There wasn't really anything in this movie necessarily that would make the audience or made my audience laugh, other than maybe some of the kills where people were just like, holy shit. I wish they would lean a little bit more into the campiness and not take themselves too seriously, because in the end, this movie's called Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey. Come on. All right, now the last negative that I want to mention is that although Winnie-the-Pooh and the other characters look much better than the first movie, they still don't look that great to me. Pooh still at times just looks like a guy walking around with a pillow underneath a shirt. You know, it just looks a little bit silly. Yes, much better than the first movie, a very low bar though. But overall, still, I think they can do a better job, specifically with Winnie-the-Pooh. I think Owl actually was pretty solid, and a couple of the other characters were decent. But the movie's called Winnie-the-Pooh, specifically Winnie-the-Pooh. I think they need to take that up a notch and not make it look like just some dude with, they grabbed a pillow off their bed, shoved it under their overalls, and we're like, all right, let's go shoot. I think they could do a better job with that, and hopefully in the next movie they will. All right, here are my final thoughts on Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. So, a pretty decent slasher movie. I had overall a pretty good time with this movie. I wasn't necessarily bored. I thought the acting overall was serviceable. A better job, just with the look of the characters, the look of the 100-acre wood. The kills, though, in this movie are definitely the standout in this movie. You get a ton of them, like I said, a nice variety. And the kills are just fun and keep you engaged. No, this movie isn't intense. There's nothing groundbreaking. There's nothing, amazing, incredible about this movie or anything like that. But if you're a slasher fan like I am, I think you can go to this movie and have a good time. Is it worth $15? I don't know about that, but still, I had a good time with it. It's a pretty good slasher movie with some solid kills. They clearly put way more time and effort into not only the kills, but the storyline in this one, which is great. Happy to say that. But those are my final thoughts on Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. Overall, I had a pretty good time. All right, if you've stuck around this far in the video, thanks so much. I appreciate it. But now it is time to talk about the little teaser trailer that we got for Bambi: The Reckoning. So essentially what happens in the teaser trailer is we see a couple people out hunting and, at nighttime. One of them says to the other one, have you ever hunted a deer before? And one of them says no. One of them says yes. And then it cuts to a deer, a big ass deer knocking over a car with its antlers. And that's pretty much it. Bambi: The Reckoning. And then also I'm going to talk about the post-credit scene for Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 right now. It's a bit of a spoiler for sure. So if you haven't seen the movie, then you should probably click away. If you don't care about spoilers, then keep watching, I guess. Or if you've seen the movie, keep watching. But essentially, the post-credit scene for Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2 is diving a little bit deeper into the regenerative stuff that they mentioned for a second in the movie. So in the movie, kind of in the middle, they mentioned that something about like regenerative abilities, but I don't think it ever happens actually in the movie until the post-credit scene. So in the post-credit scene, we see Owl, who's still alive, with Pooh, and I don't remember who got decapitated, but the other character that got decapitated. But essentially, Owl is like, hey, we're not done yet. He says something like that, or we'll be back, or whatever. And then you see Pooh, who got an axe through his head, and his head's like split in half, is kind of regenerating a little bit. And then the other character who was decapitated is also kind of regenerating a little bit as well. I don't know if that has anything to do with the honey necessarily. He shows the honey in the post-credit scene for a second. Maybe I missed something. Maybe the honey, like you rub it on the wound and it helps them regenerate, which kind of makes sense for Pooh, but does that make sense for the other characters? I don't know. But yeah, maybe the honey has a big factor in their regenerative abilities to come back to life and heal their wounds. So that's the post-credit scene right there. little something. So yeah, kind of interesting. But that is it for me, everybody. Thanks for watching my review of Winnie-the-Pooh Blood and Honey 2. If you like horror content like this, then make sure you subscribe. Check out one of these videos next to me if you want more content from me right now. But anyways, everybody, I will talk to you in the next one.